Imagine the 17th century, the year 1683. An Ottoman army of 150,000 men lays siege to Vienna. The city teeters on the brink of collapse. Europe trembles. And at this very moment, the Polish king marches to the rescue with an army of 70,000. He doesn't just save the city, he saves an entire civilization. But how? How could Europe have fallen in a single year, and how did it overcome this threat hanging over the entire continent? Watch until the end, and you'll discover the shocking connection to the Roman Empire, a power that had fallen centuries earlier. The final revelation will astonish you. Let's begin. The year 1683 cast a shadow of dread across Central Europe. Rumors of war spread faster than merchant caravans, and traders along the Danube spoke of a vast host gathering under the Sultan's banner. To many it seemed like fear-fueled exaggeration, but soon reports poured in, villages abandoned, churches burned, armies on the march. By June, there was no doubt. The Ottoman Empire had once again set its sights on Vienna. The Grand Vizier's army was unlike any Europe had seen in a century. Though chroniclers later inflated the number to nearly 300,000, it likely numbered around 150,000 soldiers. It was a vast and diverse force. The Janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry, marched with veteran discipline. Sipahi cavalry in gleaming armor rode alongside fierce Tatar horsemen from the steppes. Their reputation for cruelty struck terror long before they arrived. Siege engineers brought artillery, sappers, and wagons stacked with timber to build earthworks and trenches. The army's sheer size slowed its advance, but its purpose was clear. From Adrianople through the Balkans, it rolled like an unstoppable tide. Cities that resisted were razed, those that surrendered were spared, but forced to supply men and provisions. By July, Ottoman banners appeared at Austria's borders. When the Ottomans reached Vienna, they saw not just a city, but a true Roman fortress. Thick walls, bastions, deep moats, all of it was direct inheritance from ancient Rome. Vienna, capital of the Habsburgs, was no ordinary city. It was a fortress surrounded by thick walls, bastions, and moats. Yet inside, its defenses were stretched thin. Fearing capture, Emperor Leopold I fled the city on July 7th, retreating west to Linz. Many nobles followed, leaving Vienna in the hands of a garrison of just 15,000 soldiers and a citizen militia of about 5,000. Back in antiquity, the Romans understood survival required more than just a wall, it demanded a system. Their camps were built in a single day and could withstand sieges. Medieval engineers inherited this logic. That's why Vienna held out for 2 months against the mightiest army in the world. Its walls functioned as a single mechanism like a Roman camp, like the legacy of an empire that had fallen 1,000 years earlier. It was Rome that taught Europe how to build fortresses. Polish King John III, Sobieski marched to defend the city. This is the story of courage, strategy, and heroism, where the fate of a continent hung in the balance, and the Battle of Vienna became the stage for an epic showdown. Roman discipline lived in the heart of the Polish army. King John III, Sobieski, didn't just raise a force. He built an army in the Roman spirit. Life in Vienna had become a struggle for survival. With each passing day, food grew scarcer, bread was rationed, access to the Danube was cut off. Disease spread quickly in the cramped shelters where civilians huddled in churches and cellars during bombardments. Yet morale never broke. The commander inspired both soldiers and citizens alike, declaring that Vienna would never surrender. Every time the Ottomans advanced, defenders sallied forth, burning siege works and harassing sappers. Women and children carried stones, water, and ammunition to the ramparts, fighting side by side with soldiers. Just as with the Romans, there was no room for panic. There was formation, there were orders, there was discipline. The same held true for Vienna's defenders and for Sobieski. His famed Winged Hussars never charged without a plan. They waited, they observed, and at the decisive moment, they struck like a Roman wedge. This was exactly how the Romans defeated barbarians, not by numbers, but by tactics. This was exactly how Sobieski intended to crush the Ottomans, not by rage, but by Roman discipline. Rome was the center of the Roman world. Vienna became that center for all of Christendom. The Pope called on all the nations of Europe to set aside their feuds and unite as one army against the Ottoman threat. Thus the Holy League was born. The Holy League was fragile, a coalition of necessity, not unity. Alongside Sobieski's Polish army marched contingents from Bavaria, Saxony, Franconia, and Swabia. The Holy Roman Empire, though fractured, also sent troops. Together they formed a patchwork of Christian Europe, often divided, but now united by a common threat. This too was a Roman idea, to defend not just a city, but civilization itself. The ancient Romans believed Rome was more than a city. It was order against chaos, law against barbarism, civilization against destruction. And Sobieski embraced this idea. When asked why he marched to Vienna's aid, he replied, "To save Vienna is to save all of Europe. If Vienna falls, Poland falls, Germany falls, everything we've built for centuries collapses." This was pure Roman thinking. The Romans didn't fight for land. They fought for Pax Romana, peace, order, law. Sobieski, in the late 17th century, revived this as Pax Christiana, the Christian world against chaos. Roman logistics, 500 kilometers in 3 weeks. While Vienna was under siege, Europe finally united. Poles, Austrians, Bavarians, Saxons, all forgot old quarrels, all marched together against the enemy, and this too was a lesson from Rome. The great empire stood not on one people, but on alliances, laws, and shared culture. In 1683, this idea was reborn under a Christian banner, but with a Roman soul. At dawn on September 12th, the hills around Vienna stirred to life. The fields and forests that had witnessed 2 months of relentless siege were now about to host something greater, the clash of two colossal armies, one fighting for conquest, the other for survival. The air was thick with tension. In the valleys below, crescent banners of the Ottoman Empire fluttered in the morning wind, their vast encampments sprawling like a second city. On the ridges above, crosses of Christendom rose among the trees where the relief army gathered to strike. The long night of siege was over. The day of battle had come. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha had no doubt of victory. His army numbered perhaps 120,000 strong, with hardened Janissaries at its core, supported by Sipahi cavalry, Tatar auxiliaries, and contingents from across the empire. Siege works already pressed against Vienna's battered walls. The defenders were at their breaking point. When news reached him of the Christian relief force, he remained unshaken. He believed his army could contain Vienna and repel the newcomers. His strategy? Hold the high ground and grind down the enemy in a war of attrition. But his confidence blinded him. He underestimated both Vienna's defenders and the fury of the Polish king racing to their aid. High on the Kahlenberg Ridge, King John III Sobieski surveyed the scene. Below him, the plain stretched to the city walls, dominated by the Ottoman camp with its glittering tents and banners. To the west lay Vienna itself, scarred and smoking, its walls cratered but still standing. Sobieski knew time was short. Each hour risked Vienna's fall, but he also understood the value of patience. The Allied army, Poles, Austrians, Bavarians, Saxons needed coordination. A hasty strike could shatter them. That morning, Sobieski rallied his commanders. He reminded them this was not merely a battle for Vienna, but for all of Christendom. His words were fiery and resolute. Today, we fight not for crowns or land, but for our faith, our families, and the survival of Europe. The Winged Hussars of Sobieski charged into the Ottoman camp. The battlefield was treacherous. To the east, the Ottomans had entrenched themselves around Vienna, their trenches and siege lines forming barriers of earth and fire. To the north, thick woods covered the ridges through which the Allied army had to march. The terrain favored defense, but Sobieski turned it to his advantage, concealing his movements until the moment of attack. The Allied forces stretched in a wide line, nearly $70,000 strong. On the left flank stood Imperial troops under Charles of Lorraine, pressing toward Vienna's northern defenses. In the center, German contingents advanced through the forests, clashing with Ottoman outposts. On the right flank, hidden among the hills, Sobieski massed his 20,000 Polish cavalry, waiting for the decisive strike. The Ottomans surged out to meet them. Janissaries in tall white headgear advanced with discipline, drums pounding and war cries echoing. Cavalry units wheeled across the plains, while Tatar horsemen darted like shadows along the flanks. By midday, The clash was in full fury. Cannon thundered from both sides, smoke rising in choking clouds over the battlefield. Muskets cracked in volleys, cutting down ranks of men, while swords and axes clashed in brutal melee. Vienna itself became part of the fight. From within the walls, the commander ordered desperate sorties against the Ottoman siege lines, setting fire to trenches and distracting their foes. The defenders, though half-starved and wounded, fought as if possessed, knowing salvation was at hand. The battle stretched into the afternoon. The Allies pressed slowly but steadily, driving the Ottomans back from the ridges. Kara Mustafa, realizing the danger, threw more troops into the fray, determined to hold his ground. But each wave of resistance was met with greater ferocity. The moment of decision drew near. As the sun began to sink, Sobieski saw his chance. The Ottoman lines, stretched and battered from hours of fighting, had begun to waver. The Janissaries still held firm near the city, but the flanks were collapsing under pressure. He turned to his Polish Hussars, the legendary winged cavalry. Their armor gleamed, great feathered wings rose from their saddles. Behind them, ranks of heavy cavalry from across Europe readied for the final charge. Sobieski lifted his sword and gave the order. The world would soon witness a charge that would echo through history. The battlefield trembled with the weight of tens of thousands locked in struggle. But as the sun dipped low on September 12, 1683, a new sound rose above the clash of steel and thunder of cannon, the pounding of hooves. On the slopes of Kahlenberg Hill, hidden until the very last moment, the greatest cavalry force in Europe prepared to descend upon the enemy. At their head was King John III Sobieski, the Lion of Poland, his eyes fixed on the Ottoman camp sprawling across the plains below. The time had come for the strike that would decide the fate of Vienna and perhaps of Europe itself. Nearly 20,000 horsemen stood ready, Polish hussars, German cuirassiers, and other mounted contingents of the Holy League. But it was the hussars who captured every gaze. Clad in gleaming armor, long lances poised, sabers at their sides, their most striking feature were the great wooden frames rising from their backs, fitted with eagle feathers that arched like wings. In the wind, they rattled with a ghostly hiss, a sound that terrified both men and horses. To friend and foe alike, they seemed less like soldiers and more like warriors descended from the heavens. Sobieski himself took command of the right flank, placing himself at the tip of the spear. Few kings in history would have dared such a charge, but Sobieski was not a king content to watch from a distance. The battlefield had reached its breaking point. The Allied infantry pressed hard on the Ottoman lines, pushing them back toward their camp. But victory was not yet assured. The Janissaries still fought ferociously near the city walls, their discipline holding even as the tide turned against them. Sobieski knew that one decisive blow was needed to shatter the enemy's will. He turned to his men, raised his sword, and shouted, "In the name of God and the Blessed Virgin Mary, charge for Vienna, charge for Poland, charge for Christendom." The trumpet sounded, the earth shook, the charge began. The thunder of hooves echoed across the valley as the cavalry surged forward. Dust rose in great clouds. Sunlight flashed off armor and lances as the horde of horsemen gained speed. From the ridges of Kahlenberg, they poured down in waves unstoppable and furious. At their head, Sobieski spurred his horse to full gallop, his standard raised high. The hussars leveled their lances, their wings whistling through the air. The Ottomans looked up in shock. For hours they had battled infantry, never expecting a cavalry strike of such magnitude. Kara Mustafa's soldiers tried to form defensive lines, but it was too late. When the hussars crashed into them, it was like a thunderbolt from the sky. The sheer weight and momentum of the charge smashed through Ottoman ranks. Lines of Sipahi cavalry buckled under the impact, scattered like leaves in a storm. Infantry formations crumbled, their ranks torn apart by lance and saber. The hussars drove deep into the heart of the Ottoman camp, their ferocity unmatched. Allied cavalry followed, exploiting the breach. German and Austrian horsemen swept into the fray, cutting down enemies and driving them into panic. The Ottoman lines, so confident that morning, dissolved into chaos. Sobieski and his men cut straight toward Kara Mustafa's command post. The Grand Vizier fled in haste, his army collapsing around him. What had begun as a siege of triumph ended in a rout. From the city walls, the defenders of Vienna watched in awe. They saw the winged horsemen storming through the Ottoman camp, the enemy scattering in terror. Cheers erupted from the battered garrison as the truth became clear. Vienna had been saved. As dusk fell, the once mighty Ottoman army was in full retreat, abandoning their cannons, tents, and supplies in a desperate flight eastward. Kara Mustafa's grand gamble had failed. The gateway to Europe remained closed, and at its heart stood the charge of the Hussars, the largest and most decisive cavalry assault in European history. The victory at Vienna became a turning point in history. It halted Ottoman expansion into Central Europe, restored faith and morale across Christian states, and proved that even the greatest empires could be challenged with courage, strategy, and unity. But this was not just Poland's victory. This was the victory of Europe and of the entire Christian world. This was the victory of Rome's legacy, because on that day, more than men fought. An idea fought the idea of order, discipline, law, and unity, an idea born on the banks of the Tiber over 1,000 years earlier. Rome had fallen, but its spirit lived on, and in the 17th century, that spirit saved Europe. King Sobieski entered Vienna as a hero. He was hailed as the savior of Europe. The Polish Hussars became legend, and the Battle of Vienna became a symbol of how even against overwhelming odds spirit and unity can triumph. The echoes of this battle resonated for decades in diplomacy, warfare, art, and the collective memory of nations. Because that day, they didn't just save a city, they saved an entire civilization. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell. More stories about how ancient Rome lives on in our world are coming soon.